Alright, guys, I'm coming to you with my first yap. Um, my first, I guess, autistic yap for the first time. And a semblance of, I guess, how hip hop has affected my life. And just kind of backtracing as I'm more leading my life into my passion of playing music and kind of recognizing the music that I play more and more and why this kind of affects me today. So as you'll um will see, this video is about why Earl Sweatshirt is my favorite rapper today. Um I'm a Afro Indian Chinese with a yeah, with a tiny mix of a tiny bit of Venezuelan. Ye- yeah, and you know, having been born, and as y'all can kind of tell, there's a lot of influences currently dictating my identity. Um, my dad mostly being my dad being Chinese Indian, and my mom being African Chinese. Um, obviously coming into more of a limelight of learning um about my identity and the shared struggles that all three people have, especially as Chinese and blacks have more so coexisted, but in more of Trinidad's history, how blacks and Indians has kind of coincided together. My upbringing, I mean, usually, as anybody who would kind of, or maybe the demographic this is reaching out to, hopefully, usually Caribbean students right now are, you know, especially if you're born in America, you'd be kind of like second generation. But my childhood has always been a bit, and this isn't scripted anyway, so I'm apologizing in advance if it's good. But my childhood has never been very easy to navigate, as in where do I really fit in? And if you're thinking of that or lyric right now, you're definitely we'll get to that, right? And as someone who has listened to a lot of hip hop and music in general, it has been like a good way of me being able to cope and kind of deal with the harsh realities of things that have happened in my life, but also things that have um I guess yeah for kind of getting me to the current point of existence that I am today. Um, and that's because there had been, I would say, a lot of times in my life where I felt like things was scary. I mean, life is scary, obviously, but times were in my life where I felt like I don't know, things were hopeless. Things things were grim. That once I fell into that dark place, it didn't it didn't have much, I guess, options for me to get out of there. That this is what it was, and this was my life. That this was how it was gonna be, and less control of where I can take it. So I'll start with, I guess, saying that, you know, as someone who wasn't very much aware of their dual heritages at a young age, and was did a little bit of preschool down here, a little bit of preschool up there, and then did a elementary down up there for a little bit, up there in the states, and then down here in Trinidad, and then um did primary school. Yeah, oh yeah, but eventually came to settle down. Like I said earlier, you would typically be like, oh well, a Caribbean person would stay, but as being uh, as being in a well, I didn't realize there was a guy behind me doing thing. As a usually as an you wouldn't really have a, I guess, a Caribbean, no, an American student come into the Caribbean to do school. It's not very looking back, it's not. I hadn't met anybody else who typically was like that, and people who I could have related to somewhat of that knowledge or that perspective would have been um more of the richer kids, and that's why a lot of my good friends and friends of nature that kind of stuck around was more friends who had more of I guess a higher let's say their parents were wealthy. Yeah, let's just say that more advantages or more well off, or somebody who could kind of relate to being able to somewhat travel. Yeah, like if you had enough money to obviously travel, then you obviously could have done more things. And I wouldn't like to flex, not as a big flex on people, but as I've always more so also been more so um I would say academically intelligent. And um typically why that matters is because, you know um well, I don't really know if that matters a whole lot in terms of the point I'm trying to make here, outside of how it felt alienated. Well, yeah, I guess in a sense that um being someone who strives strided for in an education or higher education learning, but also didn't really belong. I think because higher education be kind of isolates you, but also because it kind of um, let's say culls you into a more colonial lens, or or yeah, less culturally, or I don't know, the white man's world is what I would like to use the term of. Yeah. I think it kind of also was kind of uprooting me from my own culture, as you know to try and keep in line, to try and be a very much um upstanding person, you kind of learn to cut off parts of yourself that are deemed unnecessary, unworthy. And especially by the time as a man starts to grow up, you will become more ingrained in that fashion, as I would like to say something that reading bell hooks kind of put this into words for me, was that like by the time you start to as a boy, as children, you're graced with this kind of love, this universal love that, no matter of your nature, your unique ticks and whatever, um that it didn't really matter, you would be loved regardless. But I think for boys in specific, by the time they start to reach puberty, you kind of get this silent cord cut where your quirks um are less and less kind of chipped away due to, yeah, um and with what that comes with, as I'm trying to get back to why I'm saying this, is because this kind of leads into a natural hatred of yourself, per se, that with, well, not a hatred of yourself, but a hatred in general of the world, as you are less and less having to buck up to responsibilities and perceived to be the one handling business. As someone who was also very creatively inclined, but also didn't know how to express it, or didn't really take the time, or the time was being more so cut away from me. Thank God that the only thing that was kind of that my good tether was video games, and even that was seen as less and still kind of today still seen as less impactful as a means of um trying to make money, or trying to have like be a ideal hobby or dream of something. And it definitely has its drawbacks, but let's get back to but yeah, as being a teenager, you let's take it back to 2016, as this was like the prime time where this would have been a nature of me now hitting 14. I would say the household that I was living in was not my favorite, not ideal. And obviously, well, hip hop was, I mean, my experience of hip hop before that would have been, I would have heard my Drake, my Lil Wayne at the time. Like, I also grew up during a little freakish time of like being around 90s parents, 90s kids, um, and, having been around their parents. So, I also grew up with like Gorillaz influence, Linkin Park influence, um, and those also had elements of rap into it. And I would say a little bit more than most. I mean, obviously, because of Trinidad's in culture, soca with the EDM mix, my dad being a DJ himself and playing mostly Caribbean music, this all had like this kind of influence on me as a whole, as regarding my music taste. But 2016, as I was like now settling in, being in an all boys school, coming from a primary school or elementary school, where there was boys and girls. secondary school was only boys, and I guess the rough tendency or the rough nature was starting to rub off on me a bit, though necessarily not really hip hop, because hip hop is not like, you know, traditional music. You know, people know the dancehall. Dancehall is, or, you know, playing a cartel vibes, whatever. And yeah, say around 2016, being introduced to Lil Uzi, I would say that was like the first hip hop artist that I could have fully connected to. And I think because of the nature of how hip hop was at that time, becoming more like less, I don't know how to really describe it, but it was a lot more groovy in the sense of like trap at the time, bro. If you know about the trap era, you know about the trap era. Like, let's not get it fucked up. Future, fucking Lil Uzi, fucking Migos. The takeover at that time was crazy. And as time went along, we bumping. I mean, the era. Do we have to even talk about the era? Do we even need a mini rant about how great the 2016 era was? Like, come on now, unparalleled. The freshman arc was, I think, the best capsulation of that. But then came, I guess, the transition, as to how this pertains to Earl eventually. And I would say that, you know, as my own parents' story, being two um two people who decided to take a big risk as going to the states at a young age. My mom was 21 and my dad was 20, essentially, when they had me, and I was only now 14 at the time. I think, you know, my parents eventually getting divorced and whatnot, and me having to live away and stay with my mom, and then eventually learn to like live with a stepfather and whatnot. Um, you know, my household was not very, you know, fun to live in. The frustration having built up started to coincide with the fact that for me, um, we needed, I needed, I was leading into this idea of, I guess, that my life was kind of ending. Like, something about, you know, me having been a smart kid growing up, a very top student, and the fact that I was kind of slipping, things were kind of slipping away from me, as in I wasn't doing as well in school anymore. I really wasn't feeling the love of my parents as much, and and the fact that, you know, the the idea of gaming not really becoming a natural path or something that I knew how to really create for myself, and I didn't really have much initiation to figure out how to or really have the resources of becoming a gamer or streamer at the time or whatnot. Like, I felt like things that mattered to me as a person was dying or dead. So it's easy to say that at the time. Well, at the time, I had no idea of why I was getting this kind of vibe of. I mean, obviously, I was just thinking with my household, but I didn't realize as a on a deeper level of why that was impacting me so much. As someone who was generally a sweet kid or kind-hearted person, why did I start to listen to music that was more so like very edgy in nature? And this is where X comes into the picture. If and X was, I would say, even up to today, my most impactful artist. Um, XXX Tentacion, the GOAT. I mean, with his songs being so deeply emotional, I mean, uh, mostly African, Jamaican, born to Jamaican parents. I mean, his background, everything kind of fit into that kind of story of this nature of. But if but coming out of this whole, the theme of being very violent at first, and then having heard his backstory, and then like seeing someone who had taken control or had that kind of like, sorry, all the birds. Ah, okay, I'm gonna come back because I feel like something else is pinging me. Okay, I want to got some water. That's what I was being called to do. Get some water. Um, and well, at this time, I would have also been collaborating with somebody like Mac, and then the era of hip hop that was now coming after Odd Future, um, more so would have been X's era. So I guess that's the way to put it, as how time would have kind of fit when Odd Future was going around. I definitely wasn't listening to Odd Future at the time or really anything worthy of Tyler the Creator. I would have now been kind of stepping out of maybe my white, like that kind of popish. Well, I would have been listening to a lot of dubstep. So coming out to that, yeah, that era into more hip hop. Mac, my well, X was, yeah, and the whole era of like the SoundCloud vibes for sure. And well, X, my most, if and as when I get to my personal reason as to why I choose Earl as my current, like, you tell me any the first artist I'm gonna play at a function, I'm gonna play Earl. And the reason being, as I'm getting into it, is X was a person who was very much like, I don't know, he was the pioneer for me that kind of brought into the trap metal, rap metal vibe that kind of hit a very much a very nice spot in my brain, I would say. Like I think it scratched that itch for me as someone who was very much like very upset and very like I had a lot of energy that I didn't know I had in my body to just kind of like fucking use, and I didn't know how to do with it and deal with it in any time that wasn't, well, now that I know is still destructive, but still in a constructive use to propel myself in life. Um and recognize it. I think, you know, with all that destruction, and as someone who kind of led a blueprint for me as well, of someone who was feeling a great amount of loss, pain, sorrow, I want to transition into the second artist that I would mention in this video that had a big impact on me, and is the second most impactful behind Earl, and those two being the Suicide Boys. And obviously, anybody who is familiar with their story now, um, two white boys grew up in New Orleans, um, kind of, with their like Three Sex Mafia heavily influenced style of music. You know, they, as someone who was also born in Atlanta, and you kind of get to see the kind of real South influence on the music, coupled with how fucking great their music was. But as like someone who was also very depressed at the time and very like emotionally moody, and had like, yeah, like had troubles just waking up, living, them, those two, as more X was still, I mean, X definitely dipped into his sad bag, but you know I think as someone who was now delving into like weed at the time, X's music was more like, like for me, it always come to like throwing a mosh pit, like again, like thing, but and even though Suicide Boys also had that rage vibe to them, and definitely um the energy of fuck the world definitely culminated within me, as still I would say that X's music was more, I felt like he kind of hit the rage part more, while Suicide Boys was more like a melancholic kind of high sadness, like just kind of want to, I mean, that era of Lil Peep and stuff, though it didn't exactly hit it for me too. Like I didn't want to like do drugs until I died. I was more so just like I wanted to fade away, low key. And I guess that's kind of like the same thing, but to me it kind of feels a little different. Like I had still had something I wanted to tether to, but also just kind of like I was still tethered to something, Like there was still something holding me here, but I still wanted to, fade away. Um, but you know, as someone who is like now dealing with girls and whatnot, and you'll see that even Suicide Boys also kind of took this approach. X was X definitely blew up more quickly and more mainstream in the public eye and was more accepted way more than Suicide Boys mainstream. Um, like the when Question Mark dropped in 2018, I would still say, bro, the most diverse hip hop album that his era of people ever dropped. You know, and I mean the bags that this man was reaching into as he was now trying to cultivate a more positive outlook. And bro, the bags that X had dipped my mind into as well. Um, Holy shit! Like, bro, dipped into concepts of spirituality, helping out people. I mean, he was beefing. I mean, like, you see why Kendrick had backed up when the industry was also trying to like low key kind of like um shut down X is like you see what like why Kendrick and his label was fucking with X because X was that guy, bro. He was like not caring. He already had seen beyond the point like someone like Capitalist Steez and those men from the New York era. I mean, he connected with Jody Badass at that time, so like he definitely was also seeing the past of hip hop and seeing where that kind of leads you. And he already his trajectory as to like what his image was supposed to be. He was literally unpredictable, bro. He literally was like the complete flip flip the table. I'm building my own like, and he had the fucking energy and the numbers to actually push. The U.S. government definitely didn't want someone who was gonna cultivate a good life experience for people, and that's why the image, like the quick ending of him probably was why it happened. But as someone, I mean, I was emotionally distraught, bro, for sure. And that kind of leads into, you know, something that still kind of rang true to me as someone who really didn't even have my identity. I mean, everything. I mean, at the time, still for me, I was still someone who was just like trying to give myself up to this cause of like trying to be the person that I guess society through my parents wanted me to be for the expectations, and realizing that how much it was really taken from me than adding. And yeah, bro, like that that also kind of still put something to me where like it it really 2019, you know there was still a lot of things that I was still going through, and like I was still doing poor academically, and this was my final year in high school. So, the exam period, I'm sure for everybody would have been like, how you gonna get your shit together? And, coupled with the fact that I really was feeling a lack of love in my life, and like was now kind of again over a traumatic period also in family. It was very rocky, it was very rocky for me. And yeah, it still kind of culminated to this point of like feeling hopeless, and even though eventually I still clutched and fucking pulled something out of me to be able to say fuck everybody. Y'all thought I was like gonna take the L and shit. Like, no, I've clutched up and I got a big dub. 2019 is one of my funnest years ever, having gone. But, you know, and as quickly as I found some stability and everything, I quickly lost it. That was short lived. Um, but sometimes, you know, you know, for that brief period, that was a moment of ecstasy. And it's always the little pockets of hope and love and prosperity that you get, that even when you are dealing with like your darkest times and whatnot, you're still able to, like, even if you don't remember, your mind still always kind of has this perseverance. Once you have this slow perseverance about you, you'll always be able to overcome darker moments. So yeah, I think this was the transition around when someone like Suicide Boys would have been making their transition to coming off drugs, which was, like I said, a very clean, like like what I was saying with X is that X was also a good role model of someone who was able to show change, someone who had, obviously done wrong in his life, still, was able to try and make a change, even if it kind of seemed like, regardless, he was gonna, he was fucked. I mean, yeah. And, you know, with albums like For Your Eyes Only, and I don't know, like a collective kind of despair, as you can kind of reflect on the times of that music as well. Like giving up was like any music to Suicide Boys eventually, you know. These aren't the only two artists, but I'm just drawing as the, I guess, icons at the time for me. And them wanting to come off doing drugs, as they were heavy drug users. Huge ass fly on my foot. No, kind of transited, trans helped me hit on similar path, life path transit to also um do come off of like weed and stuff that I was smoking heavily at the time. Um, and well, yeah. So Hmm. I'm in bad posture in this video, bro. What's wrong with me? Not a good example for people seeing me slouch. As and then, yeah, I would say even though those moments happened, I came to a transit where I started listening to Mac Miller. I mean, I had listened to Mac's music in between. I mean, my best friend at this time, his favorite artist was Mac Miller. And when we had reconnected by the end of like 2019, early 2020, his music was someone I kind of was bumping. And, I'd say my favorite of Mac's work being Faces. I mean, I remember when people was like um looking for the release of Diablo at the time. That was a little era. Um, but my favorite mixtape or favorite project to come out of him would have been Faces, and Faces was like a fucking psychedelic. Like Faces should be considered a psychedelic, to be honest, because the moves and grooves of that whole thing, bro. But looking at him as well, with him eventually dying, and then also someone like Juice, I mean, I talked about X. I have to talk about like the various amount of rappers who I've also seen in that era of like mumble rap who have also kind of died as well. Juice being the next big one. You know, um, PNB Rock. Um, who this the cousin of Chief Keef? Can't remember his name right now. Um, a lot of guys. I mean, a lot of people died. I mean, if you look at during that fucking Rebel Six. I mean, if anybody knows dancehall, Rebel Six, K Lion, bro. Like, come on now, come on. All this just to say, like, I have to do this. I think, yeah. So I'm back to finish off the point from yesterday. Um, yeah, I sincerely believe that, um, you know, all of those people, coming from, I guess, the mumble rap society, and I think X being a good pioneer, he said originally that his first original style was kind of influenced by Earl. And I think the point that I was trying to get to is that, you know, with him dying, it kind of signified something of the lines of like the the despair of being a colored person. Like we can't see someone winning. Like you can't win even when you try to. You see, even when you try to catch yourself. And I think even with like his vulnerability and everything, it just really spoke to me. Like even his name, like speaking on your sexual nature. I mean, so many layers to him, and how he's impacted, you know, people, and still, you know. But he did kind of leave a seed of hope, which I guess, in retrospect, if anybody was listening to some rap songs, some rap songs would have dropped in that same year. And I guess the culmination of everybody who came from that era would have, like I said, but that being, with X dying, I think it just brings around to this sense of even seeing his beginnings, a lot of grief, a lot of, I think the state of, I guess, the world we that was kind of like swept in the underbelly of how hip hop was feeling was a lot of grief, a lot of sadness, but not in the like, oh, you know I'm gonna die, like just kind of speaking on how you felt, which is why I think um coming after, I would say Earl's, I guess, more this depicted or standalone offspring, someone who has literally came after, but not as Earl who was in Odd Future. Earl who started to come back, who started to kind of deal with the demons and the impact of his nature. And I think that being Mike, being born, and Mavi, with the loops kind of taking over, and him being the pioneer of something like abstract rap, quote unquote, because it was just him, like, and even as someone who kind of communicates in this way, as you all can tell from this video, is someone who kind of like has a bunch of the pieces scattered, like at by 2020, you know 2020 to that period of my life was like something had broke inside of me. um I think the sense of overstimulation kind of brought into that feeling, with your mind being so charged, but you're not sure on like what the fuck is happening. You're being stimulated, but you don't even know what's stimulating you, and you have all these thoughts, but they don't really connect, and your mind is fractured, and you have to kind of sit in with like all these overwhelming emotions and memories and time passing and like the grief of everything and trying to put the puzzle together whether or not if pieces fit or if you have the full pieces, everything. So Mike coming out, Mike Mavi, I'd like to say, you know, maybe Wiz, um, who else? That collective, that group who came out to New York with the like dreamy kind of hook loops of beats, kind of put in a new spot in hip rap of like being very like I'm kind of fucked up. I don't want to be fucked up, but I'm just kind of fucked up and like speaking directly into that hopelessness, that void, that kind of acknowledging it. Well, first off, acknowledging that you're fucked up. Something's you know, and then like you know a solemn vow to still rise above, to still have some sort of hope regardless. And, with Mike, you know, coming out and him having his big, you know, at the time for me, it would have been like me now sitting with like, I guess, everything. Like, I had now reached 18 to 20 at this point, and, you know, something about having to reach 20 and was just like everything has progressed, but everything feels the same in a kind of like fucked up way, like everything kind of looped, and I was just in a loop, and I expected like I had kind of put in a lot of effort, but it was like, where did that lead me? You know? And a lot of the sense of where Mike and a lot of these moments of a lot of this feeling, I was just like, bro, something needs to change, but you're not sure on like what. And I think coming to a point where I was like, at 20, I thought everything was going to end for me. I thought, like, I don't know, my psyche looking back at the time was like, really prepared for like something to really come and get me. Whether that would have been salvation or that would have been like my life ending. And when that, my mind was like so heavily anxious at the time when it didn't happen, but also nothing good also came of it. I kind of now realized was coming into the point of like, you know, if I mean sometimes things can definitely happen where you find opportunity and you kind of land in a spot where you you land in like a direction or group that kind of pushes you into the area that you want to go into. But at the end of the day, if you don't grab or you know go in that direction that you see yourself going into, you'll never really reach there. You'll never reach there yourself. And yeah, um, kind of reached to that point of like, oh my goodness, like, if you want these things to stop happening to you, you gotta kind of realize like, what is it that you want? What is it that you want to get? And what you don't want. I think a lot of the time period was like recognizing what is your own demons, and then also like how do you deal with it? How do you cope? And then even your coping strategies, like everything had to be at a time period of like review, checking over, like and keep it pushing, like living in these any moment and having to choose a different response because that's how it is. N- the long-term goal of finding long-term sustained peace is by making long short but difficult decisions. Not quick action will get you a quick, I mean, sustained outcome. You have to make that sustained by changes that you create for yourself. Quick fixes will most likely never really ever solve you of your situation. It's like the I'd like to say like teach a man how to fish. He can fish forever, but if you give a man a fish a day, he'll eat for that day. But if you teach a man to fish, he'll know how to eat forever, or he'll eat every single day or something. So, but obviously, if you look at how a man would learn how to fish, you know, to get a boat, to get a pole, to get all those things, and yeah, I mean, to do all those things would be a lot more difficult. And I think the thing is that at the end of the day, at the end of learning how to fish, you'd be like, well, once you do that, you'd be like, well, if you taught yourself how to fish, and then why don't you teach yourself how to build a house, and then make your own house, and then you learn how to build a cart, and then you learn how to make your own roads, and that's how you transform yourself. That's how you transform your situations. But if it was handed to you, you would be waiting on the handouts to be able to reach there. I think right now it's learning about. I think the possibility is very open, but I think the thing is like you gotta know what. I think people right now must be engaged kept is the possibility of what you can learn to do, or lacking the imagination to imagine something different because the access is all there as we live here in the internet. I mean, even you, who, as someone who might have found this, I mean, you know, what is the imagined outcome that you're trying to build? And I think that's the more important reason, bringing this to at least when Earl had released Void Year, kind of says it out loud of like, oh, um, um, he's found his demons, he's fought it, he's defeated them, and he is creating something new. I mean, he now would have been having a child. I mean, he's looking healthier compared to physically, and all of those things has a vital impact, I guess. Oh, changing, getting murked up by mosquitoes. But yeah, wanted to come a little closer to the camera too, so y'all could see like the sky and stuff. Now, not what's behind me, and yeah, I think with Earl now coming out as well with Live, Laugh, Love, something that is more simplistic in nature, but even these songs, I mean, I think if you kind of collectively look at like, some of Earl's like more, mainstream, or like the records that each individual piece kind of identifies by, you know, I mean, I think the point of what Earl ended up having to do and why he ended up being in a successful spot is because even though he had a lot of Even for someone who could have had a very, there's a lot of high expectations on him, especially in the beginning of his career. Someone who was crowned to drop on the newest Illmatic at the time. Like, and he kind of, part of it was due, caused by, his mom sending him to Samoa and whatnot. But him having that impact of, okay, well, I'm actually just going to allow, well, he allowed his career to kind of dip, and then, you know, as even though he still tried to live up somewhat to the legacy, him slowing down, taking his time, is what eventually he got him to the position that he was in. He, you know, for a lot of, if you look at him and what he's done, he took his time, and I think that's a huge part as to why, he's my number one, because, as someone who, you know like, there's times, obviously not everything is like that, where you have to kind of, like, hit the gas, be able to go after what you want, especially as, no one's gonna hand anything to you. But it's about sometimes also learning how to, like, go with the motion of things, and as someone who eventually did all that, had all those things happen, but then also became, still thriving, I would say, and, you know still someone who I can be like as a good model of, like, I can see this person today, someone who's real. That's the most important part. The fact that he's alive today, the fact that he's, and even for himself, gave, for the associations that he rocks with, for, the messages, everything, bro. Like, it shows that these things are possible. And seeing a real world example is more hope, more blueprint for how you can live, a more foundational means of becoming, you know, someone who more so reflects on how you should live in this world. And yeah, that's my little yap session about, you know my Piscean brethren collect, um Earl sweatshirt, um um what is I don't know him by his I'm supposed to be a fan of him, bro, like, but yeah, bro, bro, his name is, to okay, Thinking either a K. I'm thinking a K. Is it not a K? K K K K K K. No, I'm thinking Queen, but it's not Queen. It's like to um Turi to. I don't remember. Thebe.